Salawat ila Muhammad. We'll begin tonight's program with a recitation of verses from the Holy Quran. Can I ask Brother Maqbool Bhai Rahim to say some verses from the Holy Book? Son.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والتين والزيتون وطور سينين وهذا البلد الأمين لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات فلهم أجر غير ممنون فما يكذبك بعد بالدين أليس الله بأحكم الحاكمين صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Ahsant Maqbool Bhai, Jazakumullah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. May I welcome you all to this seminar entitled Awakening the Spirit of Enquiry, the Future of the Khoja Shia Ishnasri Muslim Community. I have with me here Dr. Sibtain Panjwani. He is a well-known figure among our community. We see him regularly here and hear him regularly in the lectures as well. His main interest is in community research, medical ethics, and medical law as well. As we all know, he has been also the Secretary General of the World Federation for the 6 years between 1997 and 2003, and we used to always see him with the late Marhumullah Sahib. Sibtain Bhai, we are honored to have you here tonight and to hear your presentation. May I ask you all to welcome Sibtain Bhai with Nare Salawat. Wherever you want, here, wherever you want. That's fine.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. All praise is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our efforts. I really appreciate and thank the Executive Committee of London Jamaat, Stanmore, and particularly Shabir Bhai Mamdani and Liaquat Bhai Jafar for arranging this seminar. Now, whenever there is a seminar for change, we normally find not many people interested because it's a change, and people are so comfortable with what they are comfortable with. And so, inshallah, if Allah wills, then this momentum will inshallah gather. But I am really grateful to London Jamaat for holding this seminar. I am also appreciative of the seniors as well who gave me the initial platform to explore some of these ideas, and I got very good contributions from them. I am also thankful to Peterborough Jamaat's executive who also arranged a seminar of something like that, but restricted to the executive membership. I have called this project the Awakening Project, and inshallah I will present very much core ideas which I hope that you will find it interesting, and the details of those things would have to be worked out with the expertise from the community, but that will be gathering of a special kind. We have a history in Islam of 700 years, and we have a community history of 170 years. And our fundamental basic tenet upon which we grew our community, we developed our community, is our faith. Shia Ishnashri faith. And Alhamdulillah, so far it has remained intact. Now, having said this, I want to make 3 points, and then I'll present a PowerPoint which gives you some very good ideas as to what the thinking is. And then, of course, it's open to you to question. The first point I want to make is that it is worth reminding ourselves that our great-grandfathers originated from Gujarat, then migrated to Africa, where we settled. Now, in Africa, we were subjected to many influences and experiences, but our religious and cultural values were not affected greatly. Why? Because, firstly, our religious and cultural values were not challenged radically in Africa. Secondly, the world was not as pervasively globalized as we find ourselves today. And thirdly, our community in Africa developed itself mostly in isolation to other influences. Now, these 3 factors meant that our religious and cultural values were intact on the whole. Those of us who were born in East Africa and remember the 50s, the 60s, and 70s can understand what I am saying here, because our community developed in very much isolation. Then our world in Africa was essentially revolved around our work, our family, and our community. Our Imambara was a meeting place where we did our majalises, celebrated marriages, commemorated death, and did social networking. This was our world. That's my first point. The second point I want to make is that today our world is completely different. We have migrated to the West, we are globalized, we have advancing technology, and we have informatization, which is at an unprecedented level. So whilst our basic community institutions and culture have remained, broadly speaking, intact, the same, but we as community members have come under unparalleled influence of unfamiliar values. And what is most important to realize here is that these values that we are now finding ourselves or confronted with are underpinned by secularism. Now we have to understand what secularism is all about. It's very important because we live here. Essentially, secularism excludes religion from public affairs. In other words, you can believe and practice your religion, but largely in a private sphere. In simple terms, secularism is not favorable to our community. Now, that fact does not mean that we cannot live in a secular climate or not accommodate ourselves, but we must seriously consider that basically secularism at its core takes no notice of what the Quran says or what God says. The third point I want to make is that we are living under the secular ethos. The fact is that it has given us a relatively decent standard of living overall. The fact is that we enjoy the freedom to practice our beliefs. And I'm sure we all agree that having first arrived in the UK in the 60s and then in substantial numbers in the 70s without much financial means, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have done better ourselves here. Today, majority of us consider UK as our home. We have accepted UK's economical, political, and social processes that are available to us, but in doing so, we are also experiencing more and more ethos and values that are also unfavorable to us. At first glance, these values will appear ostensibly innocent, but then they gradually seep, then settle into not only in our mind, but importantly in the mind of our children. The battle today for us as a family and community is how to prevent these values, nurturing our mindset and particularly the younger generation. And for our community living in the West, and perhaps elsewhere in this globalized time, I have identified 3 main challenges facing our community that are shaping our mindset. And we need to understand them and overcome them if we want to continue to remain on the values of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. The first challenge is this idea, which is increasingly becoming a norm, is my choice first before anyone else's. This notion of self-interest is becoming the basis of our everyday important actions. Where did this type of thinking come from? This thinking comes from an ideology that gives prominence to my autonomy, my freedom, I or me in our thought processes. There is no God or Islam in this thinking. This type of thinking, my brothers and sisters, has consequences. Firstly, our life becomes slanted to the trends of the time. We choose our akhlaq and our fiqh according to what suits us and according to the time and place we are living in. Secondly, because my autonomy is important to me, we search for our dignity not in Islam, but the very moment we find ourselves in. For example, if a young man or woman is taking drug or alcohol, although against Islam, he or she will take it because it is cool to take it. Here, his or her dignity is extracted from a fashion or a trend within the peer group in order to fulfill a temporary desire. Here, this young man or woman's dignity is not grounded in anything deeper. This is a dignity for the moment. This is what it's called nowadays, dignity for the moment, compared to human dignity, which can be obtained or founded on Islam. Now, second challenge we are facing is that there is a loss of transcendence, God, generally, and in the society we are living. This is also affecting our own community in the way we think. We are concerned more with me, mine, my choice, and my freedom, and less with God or godliness. And the third challenge is this lessening or lack of spiritual experiences. Today, let us admit that our children receive and experience secular education. We do value this because this is the way to economic stability and security. But we also know that this is education without God and godliness. Whether we like it or not, this is the fact. Secular education contains both positives and negatives. The positives are that a student is able to question freely, be creative without being bound by religious dogma. The negative is that it is an education without values, without moral purpose, and does not satisfy our natural desire to feel something spiritual. Our youth that goes to university is surrounded by a non-spiritual environment. He is molded in a way that separates his life, sometimes to the extent that religion is only for the home and the real society does not give importance to religion. Hence, he develops a dual identity. His religious values and holy figures like the Prophet or Imams have little meaning in his or her life. Now, bearing these 3 points in mind, our historic evolution, our diaspora worldwide, and the challenges that are contesting our established guiding principle, what I want to say is this, that these challenges may seem innocent and harmless initially, but gradually and over time, we become familiar with these unfavorable values and begin to, if not already, accept them to be normal, whereas they are variant with the Quranic thought and our cultural lifestyle. Now, the effect of this seepage is that we behave under one set of values in our homes and imambaras, and under a different set of values outside of them. Our children will become Islamic supposedly when they are at home, and less so outside. And given the secular nature of our society, which is now so pervasive and increasingly getting entrenched, it is then only a question of time when values other than those derived from Islam will dominate our lives and our children's thought processes and subsequent conduct. Now, this is the downside of our living, which we should be aware of and will have to grapple with and resolve. All of us, individuals, family, and community, if we do not take this right action now, the worst case scenario is this, that in a generation or two, we may find that these values will have undermined the very basis of our existence as a Shia Isna Ashri community. This then is an existential threat staring at us if we don't take any action now. Now, you may agree or disagree with this conclusion. If we come to the conclusion that our community is in good stead and what we are doing is good enough, and as a community and family we have guarded ourselves adequately, then we can move along the present direction assuredly. However, if we accept the analysis that I have just given and its conclusion, then one thing is certain. We have to make very important decisions, and that is to strengthen the direction of our community. We do not have a choice in this matter. I say this because if we postpone this decision, even to evaluate the challenges we are facing and whether our institution can face them, then circumstances will force us to change. But then it will be a forced change because the whole will be deeper and detrimental. The question before us is, what can we do? And a more serious question is, how do we begin to tackle these challenges before us? One thing should be clear to us, that as a member of a proud community, and with a community history of at least 170 years, we should make our decision based on our own experiences and deeply value our enduring foundations, which have contributed to our growth as a religious community and made us survive as a community for nearly 170 years. We do not have to rely upon other people's experiences. Our own experiences are enough for us. What are these foundations? Can we identify them? We need to identify these enduring foundations and then ask whether, in the light of challenges that I have just described, are they sufficiently resourced and able to provide solution for these challenges? Brothers and sisters, if we work together on this project, and if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills, we will have a community where we will continue to see families that are united and contented, where Mimbar increasingly provide guidance for today's world, where our Sunday madrasa and Saturday workshop suitably resourced as providers of strong moral foundation, and where we will be proud to say that every child born in our community will have the opportunity
okay, good.
In this pristine Islam of Ahlul Bayt alayhim assalam, where he or she will follow Sharia with pride and without any apology. This is what we wish to create. From what we have already achieved so far, and let me say that what we have achieved so far, by the grace of Almighty, is envy of many other communities. But we now need to understand that our further progress requires us to seriously ask what challenges we are facing today, and whether our community institutions like family, Mimbar, and madrasa are sufficiently equipped to overcome these challenges. Now, this is my preamble. I want to present a PowerPoint presentation, which is a slide presentation, and hopefully then we can have a question and answer and clarification. Now this is, I can't see from here, so can I come? No, that's okay. I've got, yeah, that's fine. The first slide is just I call this Awakening Project, and some of the research questions that I don't think you can you read them or not? Yeah. Right. These are the research questions that I pose to myself. And then I started work. Now, this work did not start yesterday or day before yesterday. It took me 5 to 6 years to produce some sort of analysis. Next slide, please. And that is the work then that was shared with the community at large. There's a semi-academic paper and a video presentation. Now, this video presentation was done at the seniors in Gujarati, to whom I am really grateful. And if you do not have any of these, just give me your emails and I will give it to you. Next slide, please. Now, these are the 5 purposeful objectives of our community. Now, where did I get these from? I got it from the constitutions of various Jamaats, from the literature that I have read, and basically we have 5 purposeful objectives. And they are that we want to be a community which is pious and smart. We want to be healthier. We want to be fairer and generous. We want to be secured and strong. And we want to be responsible and accountable. These are, broadly speaking, our objectives as a community. Now, these objectives are based on values. Can we have next slide, please? These are the values that we all aspire. We want to have a flourishing godly value. We want to produce within ourselves, within our community, within individuals, the idea of taqwa. We want to imbibe with taqwa. That is our core value that we want to imbibe with. And then the 4 other values are as important. They are doing things with wisdom, integrity. A community must have integrity. A community must be just in its dealing, and it must be fair to its members and outside, and we must be compassionate and generous, which we are. We have these godly values. We have these purposeful objectives. Now, the next slide, please. So what should be our mindset? Now, this is where we begin to change. We have the objectives, we have the godly values, but our mindset should be such that every child, from the time he or she is conceived in the mother's womb, is the responsibility of the community. It should be the responsibility of the community. And this is where we start. This should be our mindset, that a child not born yet must have a right to proper and adequate education, religious. A child born must have a right for adequate religious education. A youth must have a right for adequate religious education. Every one of us. But our leadership cannot deliver this if they do not have the buy-in from the community. Our mindset must be right, that if we want to deliver this program for our future generation, then we must help the leadership deliver this. Next slide, please. Now, I just went through the challenges that I don't need to repeat that, so we'll go to the next slide, please. Right, the question before us, and I'm looking for my paper here. Oh, there it is, yeah. The question before us is that given the challenges we face, what should we do as a community to secure our faith and values? Now, this is a very important question for the leadership, for the executive committee, for the voluntary workers that are manning our Jamaat. Now, to answer that, next slide, please, we identify our leverage factors. Now, what is our leverage factors? A leverage factor is that when you introduce an action, which is a small action, it produces a momentous result. That is what we always look for in an organization, in a structure. So, we have to find out that what are the leverage factors in our community. Next slide, please. Our leverage factors are our enduring foundations, institutions. Our enduring institutions are our leverage factors. Next slide, please. What are they? They are the institution of family, institution of member, and institution of madrasa. If you look at our history, whenever we organized ourselves, the first thing is that we managed to get the families together. It is the family which made up the community. They gathered together, even if it's a 4 family. The moment we gather into 8 or 10 or 15, what happens is that we have a majalis. Institution of mimbar, for us, presents a symbol that goes back to our imams and prophet. So we have this as a sacred institution from which we get guidance. And then, of course, the moment we have children, we are worried that their moral base must be right. And therefore, we create an institution of madrasa. These three institutions are our foundational institutions. We weaken them, we weaken our community. We strengthen them, we strengthen our community. How do we strengthen these institutions? If we understand the challenges, if the leadership understand the challenges, if the community understand the challenges they are facing. And then we have to ask, are we sufficiently resourcing them to overcome these challenges? Let me give you an example of madrasa. We have a madrasa. When a child goes to a secular school, he has a different concept of a school. When he comes to a madrasa, he can easily compare the institution of madrasa that we are giving him and the school he goes to. There is so much difference in the infrastructure there and infrastructure there. So he automatically thinks that secular education and the schools are far important than our madrasa. I give credit to our boys and girls and volunteers and mothers who have produced fantastic work in Saturday workshop and Sunday madrasa. Sadly, we have to have a different story now. And that is what this is all about. Next slide. We need to microscope this institution, and when I say microscope, what do we mean? We always have to look for a principle that defines the objective of member, a principle that defines the objective of a family. The principle defines the objective of madrasa. It's so important to define and have a principle, a working principle for a community. Next slide, please. So we need to identify a working principle. What is that working principle? Now let me give you a story here. That there was a Christian professor, he was in Harvard, and he wanted to create a forum of education in the Middle East. And he was looking for a principle that would satisfy a lot of holistic characteristics within it. In other words, it could produce a holistic human being who is multidimensional in every respect, aesthetically, ethically, scientifically. So he was searching for a principle. And he was at Harvard University. He went to the library and opened up so many books. And one day he opened one book. He opened that book and he got a principle. Do you know what that book was? It was Nahjul Balagha. And I've heard him recite this story in Tehran University where he's saying, where are you people when you have a personality like Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam? That you have Nahjul Balagha in your possession, where are you? And you know what principle he got? And it's a fantastic principle. This is the one. Next slide. Just read it out because it's so important. The value of each person lies in the good he does. Qimatu kulli amrin ma yuhsinu. Yuhsinu has got a fantastic meaning. The measure of man, what this principle is saying, the measure of man, the worth of a man is measured by the good he does. What do we mean by yuhsin? What do we mean by good? Next slide, please. Look at, these are the meanings of yuhsin. It means that produce a child who is well educated. Produce a child who is aesthetically and ethically sound. Produce a child who does good, not only to himself, but to his community and his family. Produce a child who can be an apple of an eye of a society. This is what yuhsin means. And when you produce a child which is good, then that child will prosper. That child will benefit not only our own community, but will remain a symbol of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam outside. This is the child we want to produce. And which institutions can produce this child? The family has to be right, member has to be right, madrasa has to be right. Next slide, please. Now the next stage, obviously, in microscoping is establishing guideline content. Now, I don't want to go through the guideline content because it will be too much. This is not the forum for it. The forum will be the expert forum of madrasa teachers, expert forums of alims and zakirs, the expert forums of the family, people who are interested in taking interest in the families, what problems families have. Now, I have got analysis for each of them. I cannot give it to you here because it's too much. And all I can say that our families are now under tremendous pressure. The extended family is under tremendous pressure. The loneliness of our elderlies, the problems of the youth, the counseling of the youth, the marriage issues, the divorce issues, abuses are all there. We haven't identified them, we haven't looked at them, we're not managing them. We need to do that. We also need to look at the member. It has to be a dialogue. You must have seen a documentary only day before yesterday or 2 days or 3 days where they're talking about Islam Untold Story. Channel 4. How many of you looked at it? Did you look at that program? This type of program is now going to come and undermine the very basis of Islam. Because they know Islam is now there. They have to engage with Islam. How are they going to engage with Islam? By destroying the origination of the Islam. So what this story is saying, that the whole issue of Thaqalain, Quran and Sunnah, there is no existence of Quran and Sunnah. They're trying to make them, they're trying to undermine these two things. If they undermine these two things, Islam is nowhere. Now we're going to face with this thing. Who is going to guide the Ummah? Member is going to guide the Ummah. Madrasa is going to guide the Ummah. We are balanced. We can easily perceive that this is something that is not right, and we can defend it. How many of us can defend that? If you look at the advertisement today at the universities, they advertise for professors of medieval Islam. Why medieval? We have to ask this. Our alims have to ask it. Our zakirs have to ask them. Why medieval? Why are they searching for medieval teachers and professors? Because they want to change the history of Islam. So I won't go into that. This is a discussion for another time. Can I have the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Right. The third thing, when we are microscoping, is creating a dynamic structure. Now, we've talked all about these problems, and we need to have now solutions. But how are we going to have solutions? We have to create within our own structure a dynamism, a dynamic structure, so that member, family, and madrasa is properly represented right in front and within the executive council. And I'm just proposing, Shabir Bhai, I'm just proposing, it is something which I have thought, and for all of you to look at. But in proposing the dynamic structure, I'm looking at the common Jamaat hierarchy, the way they normally deal with things. This is the way we normally deal with it. Either we have a vertical hierarchy with the executive council or the president right at the top, and then the various committees. So we work like this, or we then work like that. So these are the two common way of working. Right, next slide, please. If you look at the three institutions that I've talked about, that's the member, madrasa, and the family, its function is overlapping. You have a child who is in the family. A child comes to madrasa. A child comes to majlis. So if we have a problem within a family, within our community with our youths, where do we go? These three have to act together because they overlap. And let me explain to you why in the next slide. Next slide, please. Look at the way it interlocks. We have a madrasa, we have a family. They're all interlocking. One affects the other. One can help the other. The solution lies there. If you have a drug problem in the community, these three institutions are the one that the executive will evoke. If we have a marriage problem divorce problem in our community, it is these three institutions that we would have to evoke. If we have a skill problem in our community, it is these three institutions. And madrasa, believe me, has a different story now to tell. We have reached our pinnacle with the resources that were there, with scarce resources. Madrasa have done wonderful work, but it needs to have more resources so that it can become an open mini university serving the community as a whole. The youths, the pregnant women, the mothers, the young fathers, all of them joining the madrasa just like an open mini university. Because if we do not give the right ammunitions through this institution to our community, to our children, to our youth, how are they going to defend themselves outside? So these three institutions have to work together. Next slide, please. Yes. So you can see that what is dynamic and what is necessary is that from these three institutions which already exist, which already provide values to us, we need representation from each of them to become a board which sits in every executive meeting. Because then the president can say, well, I want a report from what is happening in madrasa, what's happening in the family, what's happening in the as far as member is concerned. And if we need to do anything, we can put our resources together. And if we can have a representation of that into our executive committee, then the next stage would be, next slide. You see, we then have the expertise of our institutions, from the alims, the teachers, the people who work with the family, and the executive providing the necessary infrastructure to enliven these institutions, to make sure that this institution produce the work that they're supposed to produce. If we have that, if we have this, what will we have? Because I can't see my, there it is. If we have this, we will offer the chances for people to lead godly lives, or we will promote the notion that values every talent in the community, and we will promote a community of hope, optimism, and progress. But what is important is the next square. We will develop our own framework from our own experiences. From our own experiences, we have the intellectual capability. We have the right experiences. We have tremendous potential within our community to develop frameworks to suit our own community, because we have a history of 170 years. We have a history in Islam of 700 years. We don't have to rely upon anyone else. We can rely upon our own people. We want to make the Khoja community very strong. We must make our community very strong if we want to survive in the next 50 years. And that means we have to make these three institutions very strong. Why? Because that will keep the mazhab intact. The next slide, and this is the final slide. Yeah, because I know I've gone above. All right. Look, if we do that, we will have major shifts in ourselves and the community. In terms of discipline, hopefully our community will become more akhlaqi. In terms of accountability, we will be more nafsal. In other words, our own conscience will bite us not to do the right thing. Our own conscience will bite us if we don't do the right thing. This is the aim. The policeman will be our own conscience. It doesn't have to be the rules from the leadership or from the executive. We will ourselves behave. That's the idea. And then the focus would be on taqwa. And the effect, who knows? There will be another Sibtain Panjwani, maybe after 10, 15 years, who will probably look at these things the way I have looked at it and say, well, everything that I have said may not work. Or he may say, well, it's worked. So mashallah, inshallah, this is my, the last slide, and this is the last slide where there are some ideas that you may want to either agree, disagree, and let's have a discussion then. Thank you very much for listening to me so attentively. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sibtain Bhai, for that very enlightening lecture. I think I, as the Secretary of the Jamaat, will take some of these ideas to our EC and see if we can perhaps implement some of these issues and how we can move forward to strengthen these three enduring institutes that you have mentioned. I will now invite any questions from you. I don't know whether there are any ladies today, but if there are, I would like to give them the opportunity to have a go at the first question. You don't necessarily have to ask a question, even if you have any observations to make, please do so. So are there any questions from the ladies' side? Looks like there isn't. Is there anybody here who has got any question or any observation to make? Please come forward on the podium. Pardon? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Ahsant. Sibtain Bhai, this is an excellent analysis. It's a very good framework and metrics to look at. There are only two issues that I want to raise. Firstly, how do you get representation from the family unit onto the executive committee? Because I can understand very well that it's very easy, since our madrasa structures are well developed, that we can get representation from madrasa straight onto the executive committee. That's fairly easy. Also, we can get representation from the member, because this, there is an organization like we have Zakirin networks and all that, so we can get there. Our families, however, are huge, scattered units. And the issue is, how would you actually meet the challenge of getting representation from, say, about 500 families living around here into the executive committee? How would you actually go about it, and what will be the logistics of that? So that's one side of it, just within the parameters of your own structure, you know, as a way of just thinking about it. The second issue that I would like to raise for you to think about is, I think that we also have to ask ourselves, we have a madrasa, we have executive committee, we have a member, we have a family at the moment, and everyone would agree that most families are trying to do their best. Madrasa is trying to do its best, family is trying to do its best to bring about pious, righteous people, etc., as a product of the family, and so is the member trying to do its best. Isn't it worthwhile for us at the moment to say, okay, within your framework, and given the fact that you have certain objectives which are set out in your framework, you should actually analyze what is it that we can do more within our existing structure. This is a worthwhile thing to look at, and I think that we should certainly look at it and consider it. But within our existing structures, let's look, where is it that we need to provide resources and pointers within our existing, the way our community works. So within our family, within our member, within our madrasa, what is it that we need to do in order to bring about the same results? And do we really need to restructure? Just as a matter of thinking about it, do we really need to restructure in order to achieve that? In other words, is the restructuring an integral, inevitable part of the process of change? Or could we do change without the restructuring in a kind of incremental manner?
I think, Makbul Bhai, this is a very important question. I would like to deal with the second part first before you come to the family. As I explained to you, this is not a restructure. We're going to add values to our existing structure. That's why the whole notion of leverage. We want to leverage our existing structure to produce the best results that we can. So it's not a restructuring. Now, I didn't have enough time to analyze what I have done for madrasa, for example, or even member in the family, where I have looked at the material of the community and see where it needs tweaking, how we can go about doing this. But this is for another time, and I'm hoping that the President and the Secretary, having listened to this, would hopefully give me opportunity to even talk to the madrasa teachers and the alims, and we can all sit together and, as you say, add value to our, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. What we need to do is understand our challenges so well and make sure that these institutions that we have are then properly resourced to overcome this. So that's how it would be. As far as the family is concerned, now, we've never had a committee of family, have we? And yet it is so important that we must understand what the family's needs are. Because we are coming to a stage, at one time we did not need to, because we were small enough. I remember our great-grandfathers, when there was an issue of marriage, they used to work within themselves and sort problems out. And if there was a poverty level within the community, we were small enough to deal with it. But nowadays, the way we live and the way we exist, it's very difficult to do that sort of thing that our great-grandfather used to do. So now, it is inevitable that we have to have some representation of the family. So what's the model that one could take? We take the same model that the school takes. You know, the parent governing body. How do they choose that? I mean, we have to start. We have to take the first step by saying, okay, we will have 10 people who will represent 10 good people of various ages who do confidential work already within our community, who look after the family poverty level in a very confidential manner. These are people who we already know. Let's get them together and make them into a family subcommittee. And then one of the representation from there will be within the board. So if we start, just like we started Madrasa committee, we started with various bujus, we eventually end up with a good evolution, but we have to start somewhere, and this is the model that I will be proposing, inshallah, when the time comes. But I hope that, Mukul, that answers your question. So we are not introducing change, drastic change. We are using as a leverage factors existing institution and introducing enough to overcome the challenges. And that's all we need to do, but we have to understand thoroughly what our challenges are.
Anybody else with any comments or questions?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Sibtain Bhai, and you have spent a lot of time on this, as I know from our previous communication. The reason for me to make a comment is about 2, maybe 3 years ago, there was an article in the Telegraph by Matthew Paris. It was a full-page article about Islam. And the reason for bringing the article into this is Christianity missed out an opportunity to maintain itself, where this lecture and the previous emails that you have sent me is giving us an opportunity to stop the erosion of values that happen in Christianity. The article was, I think, after 7/7 bombings, and there was a lot of anti-Islamic feeling in the more open population. He was basing his thinking that Christianity was here 100 years ago, where Islam is today.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, do not antagonize, do not be anti-Islamic. It will dilute itself just as Christianity did, and the problem will disappear, which is the sort of antagonistic, violent Islam, which is not really the Islam. But Christianity missed out in the name of freedom and democracy, and they have the problems that the society presents, which we have quite a lot of in ourselves. But I'm saying that this is the time to take action. And the most important part of your 3 units, I think, from my personal experience, is the Zakirin. Because when I was growing up in Dar es Salaam, we had people like Malim Isa and Malim Najaf.
That's right. Yeah.
Those people, I'm 50 now, I was 12, but I remember their lectures vividly. Our children must have that opportunity, and the teachers will be the most unit. Because when they go home, and we are Gujaratis, basically what parents tell the children, the attitude is, do what I say, not what I do. It is a very common problem. The children always complain because there is a lot of hypocrisy in what we do and how we live. which shouldn't be there. Now, if the children question the parents, the hypocrisy needs to go away. It is a very big problem. Yeah, so I'm just trying to point out the importance. The timing is very important, which you've brought up, and I'm hopefully some action will take place.
Inshallah, Muntazir. Can I answer something? And that's why I'm so grateful to both Shabir Bhai and Liaquat for at least starting the ball rolling. And I'm hoping that it will open up minds, people who are listening outside as well, to what awaits us. And the point that you're making, that the dilution, it will dilute itself, is a double-edged sword there. You know, we will dilute ourselves to the extent that we'll forget our values, which keeps us going as a community. And that's the big thing staring at us. If we make sure that these values are not diluted, then we have a security of tenure again for this community. But if we don't take stock of it now, then we'll find that it will be too late to take stock at that time. The point that you're making about the children and the younger generation, today the battle is not the battle that is happening in Iraq or Syria or Libya. The battle is a battle of mind. Who captures the mind of our young people? If Islam is not going to give solution to their queries that they are asking without hypocrisy, then they will go to someone who can answer them. If our centers do not provide them with what they wish to be answered, then they will go somewhere else. And somewhere else will talk to them. We have got to talk to them here. We have to explain why we have formed ourselves the way we have formed. We have to explain why we have chosen the Maharaja we have chosen. We have to explain historically why we do things the way we do things, and it has served us well. If we can only explain to our younger generation the community's asset and the way our great-grandfathers behaved themselves to allow us to reach here, and the steps that they used to take in a consensus manner, they will understand. And that's why, brothers and sisters, we have survived for 170 years in this globalized world without a country, without the tanks, without the army, without the oil wells. How did we survive? We have survived because as a community we retained our faith. That's the reason. And we have to explain that to our younger generation. I hope, Muntazir, I took a little bit of a slant from what you're proposing, but I think I got the gist of it, and I think you made a very important point. That if we don't take the actions now, then we will have perhaps another mountain to climb.
I'm disappointed that we haven't had a much larger audience that I would have liked. I did my best to inform all the Bujus of the Jamaat, send them the discussion papers beforehand, and I was hoping a much larger audience than what I have. But I mean, that does not matter. Maybe we can sometimes discuss with individual Bujus as well, perhaps arrange such discussions. I have got one question myself as well, Sibtain Bhai, and that's how do we make our member more interactive rather than it being monologue at the moment. Because I find that once you have listened to the lecture and gone away, as soon as you have reached home, it's probably out of your mind as well. Is there any way we can improve upon the member to make it a more dialogue rather than monologue as it is at the moment?
This is a change that cannot happen so quickly because I think people are so used to the idea of a monologue. You see, we have to go back into the history of majalises. Why, for example, we have to have majalis at 9 o'clock or at 10 past 9 or in the evening. Even during Christmas time, we have to have majalises at 9 o'clock when it's holiday time. It's because we are businessmen and we wanted to make sure that we close our business and then we come and listen to majalises. By the time we come here, we are already tired. So when a majalis is very deep, then you would find that it doesn't enter our mindset at all. So, I mean, the culture has to change. That's what I'm trying to say. The culture has to change. It will be very difficult to introduce dialogue. I don't think it would be, but I think there would be resistance initially. But we have to think in terms of handling the member like this. That when a Zakir or Alim come to the member, we have to provide the subject matter to the Alim. That he must do his research. That we must tell him that these are our problems in the community. That today the young people are asking us these type of questions, and we would like some research-based answers from the member, from the pulpit. And then we must give 5 or 10 minutes on that particular exposition that he has given, which is evidence-based, which he has done the research, and let people ask questions. Initially, there may not be anyone asking the question, but eventually there may be 1, 2, 3 who will ask the question for the benefit of the masses altogether. It's how we handle it, it's how we control it, and how we move forward with it is very important. So it would be culturally very difficult to do, but it's not difficult to do.
Anybody else with any question?
Sibtain, what do you think of Sorry, Gujarati? English, Gujarati, okay. What do you think of madrasa functioning at Stanmore at moment? What do you think, the madrasa at Stanmore? What do you think? Does it work properly, or do we need any improvement for the madrasa?
I had the benefit of going I had the benefit of attending the Saturday workshop seminar. And let me tell you very frankly, that the work that they have produced is fantastic, superb. The Cube project that they are doing, now this initiative is the initiative of those people there, which they are now putting into practice. The initiative based on the Quran. This is the type of creative framework that Saturday workshop have done on their own without too much of resources. So with limited resources, they've achieved fantastic. But imagine if the community then put proper resources into their potential, where can we be? So we still have a lot more work to do, but they are restricted by the resources that they have. And the same with Sunday Madrasa. About 700-800 students confined in this building. It becomes very difficult for teachers to handle and all that. We have got to make sure that as a community, if we make madrasa the institution to be proud of, then we will have to put the resources in it. And that means the community has to fork out money for it. And that means that the potential that the girls, the mothers, and the fathers are giving to the madrasa can be trebled and quadrupled. And this is what I see in that vision. That a time will come when our madrasa institution would have been developed to such an extent that they become a mini university in its own. That we would be able to produce a child worth its name, who is more secured in secular education, more secured in religious education. And he will not be defensive about Islam. That's my view. So we need to put even more madrasa, or even more resources from the community to make our madrasa institution worth its name, which it is, of course, but we need to now move into that sort of arena where they become open mini universities. Holistically, they are producing our child to become good Mu'min, good Muslim, which they are already doing as well, but with limited resources.
One more question regarding the lectures, the ELC upstairs and elders sitting here. We are creating a gap between them, between the youngsters and the elders. And sometimes I notice that there are very few youngsters sitting upstairs and very few sitting here. And then sometimes it's other way. There are many youngsters sitting there congested, and we are sitting here, elders. There are not many elders here. So what do you suggest about this?
Well, you see, this is something that I think the dual way of arranging majalises, and I think the community felt that that is the best way to move forward. I think what we need to do now, if I may answer your question the way I think, is that we need to analyze as to how best to move forward. I think within that, we also have to understand that our culture and our language also is very important. I think we should not lose sight of the fact that we are Gujarati.